Hello everyone. This course will be mainly focused on database visualization, and we will be using a tool called Tableau. So let's get started. The business intelligence stack mainly consists of three parts. This is actually the third part. So BI stack can be categorized into three sections. The first one, I call it as the database stack. This is where we discussed common database tools and learned what are databases, tables, how to write a query and store procedures, etc. We used SQL Server. Second is what I call as extract, transform, and loading, or ETL. This is the part where we move data from one place to another. Example, Excel to a database or CSV file to a database. Data massaging is also part of the ETL process. We saw a specialized tool called SSIS, or SQL Server Integration Services. The third and the final part is what I call as visualization and storytelling. With so much of data and tools around you, can you tell a simple story of what the data is telling you? This is where we discussed visualization tools that help you tell a good story. We used a Microsoft tool called SQL Server Reporting Services, or SSRS. Now we look at another visualization tool which is very common in the industry. This is called as Tableau. Tableau is a business intelligence tool for easy visualization and analysis. So Tableau offers the tool in many flavors. You have Tableau Reader, Tableau Public, Tableau Server, Tableau Online, Tableau Desktop, and so on and so forth. So don't worry if this is getting a bit confusing. All you need to know currently is that Tableau Desktop is the most versatile tool for creating and authoring reports, and we will be using the same. In due course, I will be discussing the other flavors of Tableau as well. In order to get started, download the latest 14-day trial version of Tableau Desktop. I have given the link below. The installation is super simple. Welcome back. So I hope that you have successfully installed the latest version of Tableau Desktop 14-day trial. So let's go ahead and start Tableau. Okay, so as soon as you fire up Tableau, you will see a screen that looks something like this, right? And on the left hand side, you will see some options like Excel, text file, Access, and so on and so forth. So remember, Tableau allows you to connect to 30+ data sources and enables you to visualize them via reports. So let's go ahead and look at a simple example. So let's go ahead and click on Excel, right? So we are going to actually connect to an Excel file. But before we do that, what I'm going to do is I am going to just open up this sample Excel file. Now this is an Excel file that will get installed automatically when you install Tableau, right? So you should already find that Excel file. So we see that this Excel file has some data and it has about 4 tabs. Right? So we're going to precisely use this data and see if we can create some sort of reports. All right, I'll go ahead and close this, and I will go ahead and open up the World Bank Indicators workbook. So this is basically the data preparation or a data source pane that you will see. Right, so you saw that there were about 4 tabs, and you can see that those 4 tabs are listed over here. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to drag and drop data by country. And as soon as I do that, it gives me some sample of the data that is contained inside that tab. All right. So if you see here, there is 2 options. One says live and one says an extract. A live connection is nothing but directly connecting to the Excel, right? In this case, we are connecting to Excel, so it will directly connect to Excel. But if you choose extract, this simply means that Tableau will import the data into its own custom database. Now that is optimized for speed. So we'll just leave it as a live connection for now. We will explore extracts as we go on in further sessions. All right, so these are the columns that it found automatically, right? And there is a couple of things you can do with these as well, right? So we won't go too much into it in this session, but in the coming sessions, we will look at things like what is a custom split, what is a data interpreter, and so on and so forth. Okay, so yeah, this looks good. So now I'm going to use this data and create a report out of it. Okay, so there is a sheet 1. So I'm going to go ahead and click on sheet 1, and I'll just go ahead and rename the sheet to something as world indicators. All right. So on the left hand side, you see that the two main things. One is called dimensions, and the second one is called measures. So dimensions are entities like countries, employee names, regions, and stuff like that. Measures are nothing but numbers like revenue, cost, profit, etc. So don't worry too much about the details for now. You will get these concepts as we go along. Now let's drag and drop something, right? So let's drag and drop country name into the report. And this is where you start creating the reports, right? So we'll just keep it very simple for now. I'll keep showing you more and more stuff as we go on in further sessions. And what I'm going to do is I am going to drag and drop a dimension, right? So let's just say I want to drag and drop, say finance GDP. Okay. And let's say something else. Let's find something interesting. All right, let's do the stock traded total value. And this is your first tabular Tableau report. Simple stuff. What we did is we connected to an Excel source, and we are just playing around with it, and we created a particular report very quickly. All right, so let's go a little bit more advanced into this. Do you remember we had 4 tabs in that Excel and we're just using one of them? So let's go ahead and play around with that. How about we go ahead and look at data from another tab and kind of bring in data from that tab as well, right? So I'll go with my data source option again. And this time what I'm going to do is I am going to drag and drop another tab. So as soon as I do that, it basically asks me that, okay, there are 2 tabs. How do you want to join them, right? So there are 4 types of joins. There is an inner join, there is a left join, right join, and a full outer join. And the Venn diagrams, these are called Venn diagrams, show you, what data will be captured in each type of joins. Now, I'm happy to provide you with a link that you can do some further reading in case you want to get acquainted or deep dive into the concept of joins. But these are basic SQL concepts. And then, these are the commonly used joins in SQL. All right. So there's a couple of things we need to do, right? So first thing is that it asks me which column to join. So on the data by country tab, use the country name, and here you use the country, right? So you join using both of them. So as soon as you do that, you see that, by default, it has taken an inner join. And let me go ahead and just make this a left join so that all the data from the first tab is accounted for. And then you see that both the data has been combined, right? So this is actually, these are the 3 columns that is coming from your tab 2, right? So let's go ahead and modify our report. And now you see that in dimensions, you find a couple of other dimensions and attributes, right? So earlier you didn't find regions and subregions, but now since we have joined the 2 tabs, we are seeing some additional dimensions as well. So I'll go ahead and drag and drop the country, and I will drag and drop the region. Actually, I don't need the country. I already have the country, and I'll drag and drop the sub-region, right? So you see how easy it is. So we just took an Excel file, we joined two tabs within that Excel file, and now we have a very quick report. So this all looks good, right? So you know how to join the data. But if you notice, we actually joined two tabs within the same Excel file, that is the same data source. But what if some of your data is in an Excel file and some of them is in a SQL server? Can we join two different data systems altogether? Let's find out. All right, so let's go to our data source and let's go to connections and now add a SQL server connection, right? So this is my local SQL instance. So if you have SQL installed, you will have your own server name. And if you would like to get acquainted with how to install SQL, how to put some sample databases, I have some courses for it as well. Please feel free to refer to my other courses. But for now, basically, I just wanted to show you an example. Now in SQL, I have actually installed a database called AdventureWorks. Now this is basically a sample database that Microsoft ships, right? So you see that you'll see the same database being used in many courses by different authors. It's actually called AdventureWorks and they ship a version of it with every release. This is just to play around with some data. So what we're going to do is connect to our SQL server, and then I'm going to select AdventureWorks. All right, so we have these two tabs coming from Excel, and now I have introduced a second data source from our SQL server. All right, so I'm going to drag and drop this, and again it's going to just ask me a couple of questions, and I'm going to basically use the country name, and from our country region I'm going to use the name. All right, this looks good. And now if I just update this, it will basically join all the three data sources. So you see that the country region code is coming from the SQL server. I can actually run a select star from that table, and you see this is the data that comes from the SQL server box. All right, so we saw how to actually go ahead and join SQL server and Excel. Now let's go ahead and make some modifications in the report. Now in the report, now you see there are more dimensions, right? So you see the data by country, there's regions and subregions, and then the country region are the three dimensions added, and this is particularly coming from our Excel file, our SQL server. So if I drag and drop the country region code, you see that it nicely stitches with the different data points in our Excel as well. So now if you think carefully, what we did is we scrubbed some data from Excel, joined Excel tabs and connected it to SQL server and quickly created an awesome report, right? So imagine if you needed to do this the traditional way. You will need to hire folks who need to write code to import, stitch, and massage data from Excel and MS SQL and ultimately land them into a centralized database where you can then start creating a report. This will at least take a couple of days and will cost you some money. But with Tableau, we did the same thing in a matter of few clicks. This is where the actual power of Tableau comes into use. We will see some more exciting things in the coming session. So before we leave, I wanted to show you one more cool thing. So I will go ahead and just create a new sheet, and I'll call this by something like interest rates by region, right? And I'll just drag and drop a measure and dimension. So I have regions, and then I need all the interest rates, right? So simple stuff. So in the first tab, we have world indicators. We have all these, different dimensions and metrics. And then in the second report, we have regions and their interest rates, right? So now you have two worksheets. So people will need to refer two reports, but ideally you'd like to package them into one, and we call this as a dashboard. So let's go ahead and create one. So if you look at this particular icon here, it says new dashboard. So I'll go ahead and click that. And what I'm going to do is drag and drop this. So when I actually try to drop this, it actually, changes the background color to gray. That basically says where this particular sheet is going to reside. So once I drop this, it lands it over there. And then the second sheet, it gives me options where to put it. Should I put it in the top, left, right, or the bottom? So let's just put it at the bottom, and then you can play around with the formatting and stuff a little bit. So we'll have a detailed course on formatting as well, but for now, this is just plain rearranging how to kind of deal with it. Again, you can take this and then, drop it on the right side, and it'll automatically adjust, right? So this is kind of a dashboard. So dashboard is nothing but, a combination of one or more worksheets that is just packaged. All right, so before we conclude, make sure you read the material whose links I have provided and ask questions in the forums as well. So in the coming sessions, we will look at more advanced concepts and introduce more and more techniques, concepts, calculations, and stuff as we go on. Thank you. Hey folks, welcome back. So the goal of this session is to take a deeper dive into creating some basic Tableau reports. So we looked at things like connecting to different data sources. We will look at a new concept today on live and extracts. Then we will drag and drop some data. We'll create some graphs, and then we'll slightly look at what are calculated columns, how to refresh extracts, and so on and so forth. All right. So in the last lecture, we saw connecting to Excel tabs and SQL Server and joining multiple data connections and ultimately creating a simple tabular report. So let's go ahead and play with Tableau a bit. Let's explore a new feature in Tableau called extracts. In Tableau, as I mentioned before, we can connect to live data source as well as a Tableau data source, right? So Tableau data source, by what I mean by Tableau data source is it's basically an option called Tableau Extract, where it pulls in data and then stores it into an internal Tableau database where it is optimized for speed. Now, my personal recommendation is to do that if possible. It'll greatly improve your report rendering speed. And again, you can set some refreshes, schedules, and stuff like that to kind of refresh the data inside the Tableau database. Now, this is what we call as a Tableau extract. So let's go ahead and quickly look at that. So if you remember, this is the Tableau data source that we created. So we connected to an Excel workbook. We dragged and dropped two tabs. We joined them. Now this example is actually from our previous video where we also have a SQL Server database connected. So this is basically what we did. And then we went ahead and clicked on the worksheet and created this report, right? So now one thing you observe is this connection says it's a live connection, right? And what it means is it is directly connecting to that Excel workbook and the SQL Server. It's not importing the data into its own database, right? So once we import the data, that's where Tableau does some magic and optimizes the data so that it can be even more faster. Now, how do we do that? It's basically we click on this button called extract. So as you can see, what it says is use an extract for better performance with the multi-connection data source. So I'm going to click on that. And by default, what it will do is it will actually pull in all the rows from whatever we have configured here, right, into its own database. Now, again, if you don't want all the rows, suppose it's like 30 million rows or something like that, and if you're not interested in all the data in it and your report doesn't need all the data, you can very well go and edit, or you can add a filter where you can just say that only give me rows where modified date is greater than, so on and so forth, right? You can do that and it will basically just get you that data. And it's worth exploring some other options as well, where you can actually configure a couple of other things in your filters, greater than, less than, equal to, and so on and so forth. We won't go too much in detail, but in the coming videos we will explore the concept of filters, where the same window will appear in your report as well. All right, so we've done that, and this is basically the extract. All right, so let me go ahead and go to my report. And now what it is doing is it's actually rendering the report from the extract. So if you can right click and say extract data, it will actually pull in all the data from the Excel sheet and the SQL Server database. So you see importing data, and it will actually import it and then create its own little database. Now this is what I always recommend people, that if possible, go ahead and import it, because Tableau has its own optimization logic. All right, so if you see it says use extract and there is a check mark, that means it is using the extract at this point of time. All right, so in short, all these techniques will literally pull data from your upstream and store it locally in your Tableau database. So I personally like to create such databases or data sources ready-made. This way my analysts can directly connect to this ready-made Tableau database and start creating reports. So think about it this way. They don't need to worry about data cleaning, upstreams, joining data, writing queries, all the things that we did in the last two lectures, right? They can just connect to this particular data source and directly start creating these reports. So they will get these dimensions and measures as soon as they connect to this particular data source, right? So it's that simple. Now, you could definitely do that and then set some sort of a schedule where it can, run every 12 hours and then pull in data from your upstreams, and then it'll keep refreshing it, right? So you can set as a multiple times a day refresh. Now, all that sounds good, but you're creating this on your laptop, right? So how does somebody in your organization use this particular data source? How do you share this database so that anybody can connect? So it's essentially the same way as you would do a Tableau report, right? Tableau has something called as, deploying or publishing this to a Tableau server. It can be an on-premise, or, that's maintained by our company, or it can be Tableau Cloud, right? So the way we do it is just right click and say publish to server, right? And there will be a URL that your administrator will provide, and then you say connect, and then you go ahead and just publish it. Now anyone who is basically an analyst need not create this. All he needs to do is go to data source, click add, and then there is an option called Tableau Server. Let me new data source, and then there is a Tableau Server where he would type in that URL, and the data source that you just published would just appear there, and he would just connect it. After connecting, he would actually get these dimensions and measures, right? So I don't worry about it for now. I will put some reading materials where you can actually read about it as well. All right, so let's move on, right? So far we have only seen tabular data. Now let's explore some graphs, right? After all, Tableau is really good at visualization, really good at line charts, bar charts, pie charts. So it'll be interesting to look at that as well. So let me go ahead and just show you something simple. I'll go ahead and create a sheet, and let me call this as world indicators, and I'll call this as graph, right? So what we are precisely going to use is this portion, right? It has some ready-made graphs here, right? And this is basically your pre-baked graphs, and we are precisely going to use this. All right. Now what I'm going to do is I am going to drag and drop a measure. So let me see. So I will drag and drop this one, passenger cars, and this is total, right? And what else? I can go ahead and actually drag and drop let's say date, right? So we have dates and we have passenger counts. So this is a typical tabular report, but what I'm going to do now is I'm going to click on this option which looks like a line chart, and magically this will convert into a line chart, right? So you have the dates or the years on the x-axis and then the passenger cars on the y-axis, right? So this is looking really good. Now I wanted to show you a couple of more things, right? So one of the things is if you drag and drop this passenger cars into this icon called labels, it will actually label them here. So this marks section is actually pretty interesting, right? There is tons of things you can do with colors, labels, path, tooltips, and we'll look at this more in depth as we go on in further videos. So tooltip is nothing but, if you hover on this, you see that particular information. Now all this information is highly customizable, right? You can actually write an English sentence which says, hey, the passenger count was way about 10,000. You can dynamically kind of create those sentences as well. So we'll look at that more as we go on in the further lectures. All right, so other thing I wanted to show you is this particular plus sign that appears. Now if your date has more granular data like month, week, days, you can keep drilling it down. It depends on what data is out there. So that's kind of it. All right. So yeah, one more thing I wanted to show you is even though you have connected to a data source, you can kind of go ahead and rename this as you want, right? So let me go ahead and do something like this, right? Just click on rename and then I can just type something like this, renamed or subregion all, right? Whatever comes to your mind. Similarly, you can go and rename the data source name as well. So these are just plain simple stuff like you would do in Microsoft Word or something like that. All right. I will have a separate session on something called calculated columns, but kind of let me just give you, an example. When you right click, there are a bunch of options here, and one of the options is to create a calculated field. Now, calculated field is nothing but what you do is you have all these existing columns or existing attributes. You kind of make use of them and create a new column, right? So imagine that you had an attribute called first name and last name. You could create a calculation called full name where you just append first name and last name, right? So let me kind of show you an example. I'll call this as sample calculation. And just to give you some reference, you can really write some very complex calculations. And what I'll do is I'll create a separate lecture just to show you about calculations, right? So there is tons of things you can use, tons of functions you can use. There is string manipulation functions, there is logical functions. So you can really write very complex code. But for now, let me just keep it very simple. So what I'll do is I'll just say, as soon as I start typing, it shows me the attributes. So region plus, and then it'll just put a string over there and then say subregion. Okay. So what I'm doing is just region and then followed by parenthesis subregion, and I'm just putting it out there. And it says the calculation is valid. Click OK, and you see that the sample calculation appeared here, right? And I can kind of even, let's actually create let's go back to the tabular form. I'll put this as rows, and let me go ahead and drag and drop the sample calculation. So you see that it has appended it. So now this is actually a very simple calculation. You can really write some very complex calculations as well. Okay. All right. So the next thing I wanted to show you is something called as hierarchies, right? So hierarchy is nothing but, it's kind of a drill down. So let me show you this. So if I drag and drop country and drag and drop region and drag and drop subregion, it's kind of hierarchical in nature, right? And what I can do is I can kind of create a pre-calculated dimension, which basically looks like this hierarchy. And the way I do it is basically, you can kind of hold the ones that you want to include in hierarchy and then just drag and drop into the other attribute. So what I'm doing is I'm going to drag and drop region and sub-region into country. Oops, this already has a hierarchy, so let me just remove the hierarchy and show you. So I'm going to drag and drop region and sub-region, and I'm just going to put it over the country, and it says, do you want to create this hierarchy? I click OK. Now if I drag and drop just this one attribute, it allows me to drill down. Look at this plus sign. It allows me to drill down even further. Right, so this is basically hierarchy. Naturally, it becomes more easier for you when you have geographical attributes to create this kind of a hierarchy. So awesome. So to summarize, we saw some basics of Tableau. We saw how to join data connections, connecting to Excel, SQL Server, and others. We had a look at extract versus live connections. We created tabular reports. We created some awesome charts, right? Some line charts. We basically used the text in it, like we displayed some numbers in it. We used labels. We briefly saw calculations. Again, don't worry too much about it. We'll have a separate lecture. And we also saw the concept of hierarchies, right? So at this point, you should be comfortable playing with some data and creating some basic reports. So I would encourage you to read some of the materials given in the documents before you watch the next lecture. So I have some white papers, some videos, and some additional reference material which will tell you how to publish a data source and use them and so on and so forth. So see you soon. All right. I hope you're all with me and enjoying the course so far. So let's quickly go ahead and summarize what we have learned so far. So we walked through Tableau setup, how to create Excel files and then connect to Excel files and SQL Server databases. We looked at joining different data sources and connections. We walked through the concept of left joins, right joins, full joins, etc. We created some basic tabular reports and graphs, and we also explored the concepts of live and extracts connections. And we ran through some basics of calculations, right? So let's actually take this a little bit further, right? Let's since we have introduced the concept of graphs, let me show you a few more things that you can do with graphs and what are the options available in Tableau. So we'll look at one specific example here. It's basically how to take some tabular data or how to take any data and then create a stacked distribution chart, right? So let me actually show you how to do that, and then that will help you to kind of analyze when would you use this versus when it's helpful, etc. Right, so we're going to use the same report that we've been playing with so far, and let me go ahead and do something over here. Yeah, let's take this interest rates by region and just duplicate this, right? So we have some data to play with, and I'll go ahead and rename this chart to something like interest rates distribution, right? So you have region, you have some metrics around it, and actually we don't need to, so let me go ahead and just remove one of the measures. So we have these two. And then naturally, when you're building some sort of bar charts and stuff, it's always nice to show it as a trend, right? I like to generally use a trend so that you know how the data looks like over a period of time. And the best way to do that is to introduce dates, right? So once you introduce dates, you have dates and the regions and then some metrics around this. So this is the typical tabular data. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually look at some of the graphs that is provided over here, right? These are all the ready-made graphs that is provided. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to specifically look at one of them, which looks like a stacked bar, right? So once you click on that, it kind of creates a stacked bar over here, which without any label at all, right? So it's basically the same tabular data, but actually showing it more graphical manner. These colors that you see are completely customizable. And if you hover on them, it shows that the blue color is for Europe, the Africa is the red color, or the yellow color, and so on and so forth. In essence, what we're trying to do is, suppose if the metric says population is 100 for 2004, how is the split of that 100, right? That's what it shows by different regions. And to make it a little bit more intuitive and descriptive, let me go ahead and practice some of the things that we learned in the previous lecture. For instance, you can take this metric and just say show me labels, and it'll actually show you labels, right? So you kind of get all this information out there, and there is tons of stuff over here that's available when you right click, and we'll go over these in the coming lectures one by one. I didn't want to really overwhelm you with a lot of features in just one shot, but I want to show you a couple of things more over here. One of the things is, definitely you can go ahead and edit the colors, right? These are the automatic colors it is assigned. You can definitely go ahead and choose, some other color palette and use them. Then these are plain numbers. You can definitely use percentages, right? So you see that the blue color is the maximum percentage, 50+% of this total bar chart, and you can actually show them as percentages as well. And this is where I wanted to introduce the concept of table calculations or quick table calculations. So quick table calculations is basically a set of calculations that it applies to your metrics or your measures. Like in this case, what I want is percent of total, right? So if I choose percent of total, it does something weird over here, right? So it has 5%, 0.8%, 0.5%, 0.5%. So in short, if I just add up all of these things, it doesn't really add up to 100. Now, why is that happening? That's because if you add up everything in this page, it'll add up to 100, right? But what I really want is the percentages for each of these bars. And the way you can actually do it is basically going to compute using and saying table down. So once you do that, then it will calculate independently for each bar in the bar graph, right? So now this is a more interesting graph to view. Distributions especially is very helpful for me in my analysis. The reason why I say that is let's take an example of maybe say call volumes, right? I work probably in a call center and I'm looking at call volumes, and I say that we receive whatever 1 million calls a day. I'm just making this number up. Naturally, the question comes, is that okay, it's worldwide, 1 million calls, that sounds good, but I really want to get sort of a split by countries, right? And that's where these things are useful. Maybe I can say that 30% of the calls come to US, 20% of them go to Europe, 70% goes to Asia. This is more descriptive to me, right? And this is a really good way of analyzing rather than just analyzing straight averages, right? On an average, I get whatever 3 calls per day. If I actually split that, I would say that maybe in Asia it's 10 calls per day, right? That's where the concept of these stack bars and distributions and all play a major role. So very interesting things over here. The next one I actually wanted to show you was the concept of, again, it's a different variation of how to join different data sources. So let me go ahead and actually show you another way of joining a data source. So let me go ahead and just close this one. And all right. So I'm going to go ahead and just prepare some data for now. You really need not worry about what I'm typing over here and some basic syntax and stuff. These are just pure SQL commands I'm typing. This is in no way related to any knowledge, any prerequisite that you need to know in order to learn Tableau, right? So let me actually go ahead and just look at our country region, which we have been playing with, and it has about 250 rows or something, 238 rows, and I'm going to choose just a portion of it. So I'm going to say that where country region code, like and I'll just say starting with A, right? So this will give me a bunch of rows. Oops, forgot a keyword. So this should, hopefully this should work. So this is giving me all the rows starting with A, and I also want all the rows that does not start with A, right? So if I just execute this will give me all the rows does not start with A. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just put this into a table so that we have some data to play with. I'm calling this as tab 1 and I'm calling this as tab 2. So we have two tables created, one with rows starting with A, other with rows not starting with A, right? So if I just refresh this, I will find two tables created here. And I'm going to precisely use these two tables in my example. All right. So let me go to my data source, and then I'm going to create a new data source right now. And I'm going to connect to my SQL server. And then let's go ahead and play with some data. So we just created these two tables. I'm going to drag and drop tab 1. This is typically how you have been doing so far, right? You used to drag and drop a particular table. Either it's connecting to Excel or it's connecting to whatever, SQL server or anything like that, right? So I'm going to follow the same thing. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put one table above another, right? So I'm going to kind of, maybe merging two tables is a wrong word. It's actually combining two tables, right? So let me show you that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take tab 2 and then put it over tab 1. See, it shows drag table to union. So basically you're unioning tab 1 and tab 2 together, right? So if I just update this, you will see that it has all the rows starting with A that came from tab 1 and all the other rows that came from tab 2. So essentially you put one table over another, right? So this is actually very helpful. So if you see the table name, it'll actually show you the source table names as well, right? And then once you do this, then it's pretty much same as how you would do anything else. Like you have tab 1 and tab 2. You can actually, if you just drag and drop country region code, you'll find that all the tables have been, kind of unioned between the two tables, right? So this is one way of actually joining data. I want to show you one more technique over here, right? So we actually saw concept of joins, union, merging and all. But if you actually think, from a little bit higher view, what we did is we were actually connecting to an external system like SQL Server or Excel and then doing all this data manipulation, right? No doubt it makes your life much simpler because you don't have to write too much code. You just point to a data source, join whatever you need and start creating your reports. But I want to show you one more thing. Here you have three Tableau data sources, right? And if you remember in the previous lecture, I told you that one of the cool things I like about Tableau and one of the cool things I like personally is that, you can actually create these data sources and actually deploy it to a server, right? So that your analyst does not need to really worry about what tables to join, what are my column names, what to do, what was my server name, permissions and stuff like that. I have done all that stuff for you and I have actually deployed it into a Tableau server. So when my analyst comes to office, all he needs to do is basically connect to that particular data source. In this case, it's tab 1 or data by country and start creating the reports, right? So say for instance, I have actually deployed two Tableau data sources for him. One which stores everything about an employee and one which stores everything about maybe parking, right? Car parking. And he is basically supposed to do some analysis on employee car parking. Means he needs data from both these sources, right? How will he do it? Because I have already deployed this, packaged it into a Tableau data source and deployed it, and he has actually connected to this, but he needs a way to kind of join these two Tableau data sources. So Tableau provides an interesting way, and they call it as data blending, and I'll show you how to do that in a short while. So the way you do that is there's something called as a primary data source and a secondary data source. And let me actually, since I was playing around with this, let me go ahead and actually delete everything so that I can show you from scratch. Okay. All right. So the way you actually do this is, let me actually take a new sheet so that it's fresh. And I'm going to connect to data and say edit relationships. And what it basically tells you is, it asks you which columns from your primary data source should be joined to a secondary data source, right? So your primary data source is country region and secondary maybe is tab 1. So let me kind of quickly first show you some data. It's basically country region codes, and it's kind of similar, right? So here you cannot do that because it's coming from different data sources. Now what I'm going to do is basically join or blend these two data sources. So the way you do it is click on the first data source, country region code, and say edit relationships. And then, you have to define how you want to join, right? The primary and secondary. And the way we want to join is using country region code, click OK, and then boom, like both have joined, right? So you can go ahead and test this. You can drag and drop country region code. And then once you click on tab 1, you see a small link appearing. This basically says that this has been joined to some other data source. You can drag and drop maybe the name and see it has actually pulled it from the secondary data source. So the first column is coming from country region Tableau data source. Second column is nicely joined with the other data source. Now there are a few things to consider over here. Data blending as you go with your reports might be a little frustrating, right? There are some rules. I have put some reading materials. Like for example, when you join the primary to your secondary, each row from primary should join to exactly one row in secondary, right? It cannot be a one-to-many relationship. And naturally, there are a certain set of rules for aggregations as well. So in short, this works, but at times it might get frustrating and it will not join because you might have a one-to-many relationship and you might get something like asterisks or stars all over the place. Like, instead of actual values, we'll just get stars over here. That just means that it's trying to join a one-to-many relationship, and that's not allowed in this blending. The other thing I wanted to share is I have personally seen that if your two Tableau data sources are very, very huge, your report sometimes becomes slower, and especially if you have filters and stuff, which we'll look at it in further lectures, it can actually get slower. So that's why I just wanted to introduce to you how to join data sources, like multiple options. One is definitely we saw how to join from the raw data sources, how to use the concept of left joins, right joins, unions, and then this is one more technique, right? So if you have all these things in your plate, naturally your analysis and report building becomes much faster because you know what's out there and you don't need to really write code. Basically, you know what to use at what time and then save time on that. So that's why I just wanted to introduce you to all these different concepts. So I hope some of these concepts were useful. We'll definitely go further in the coming lectures. We will basically look at a new concept called calculations. Calculations is nothing but adding your custom logic from your existing set of columns, right? We looked at a basic example of first name, last name. We will look at a little bit more examples of using calculations. This will be especially useful when you're designing KPIs or key performance indicators and so on and so forth. I would strongly recommend definitely practice these different data blending, data joining, and unions because it's going to be a real lifesaver for you. And definitely, if you have questions, feel free to ask through forums, through YouTube comments, or just contacting me. I'll be happy to help wherever I can. Thank you so much. Hey folks, welcome back. So we are in the 5th chapter of this Tableau series, and I hope you folks are with me so far. So we started with something very basic and slowly we are building on that. Before we proceed further into visualization, I wanted to introduce to you two ways of cleaning up data in Tableau. So the main goal of this session is to look at some techniques to transform on and clean your input data. Now, just before we get too ahead in the game, a disclaimer. I personally don't use this feature very much as I find that these tools don't always work as expected, but it's a good idea to get acquainted with them. So if the data cleanup is something that is very, very complex, I would rather do it in a database rather than doing that complexity in the data interpreter and in the Tableau layers. But in any case, let me go ahead and show you a few techniques and see how those tools work with each other. All right, so I'm going to open my Tableau workbook. It's the same workbook which we have been working so far in the previous lectures. And I'm going to go ahead and just open the same Excel file that shipped along with Tableau and which we were using in the previous lectures. All right. So we were using the World Bank indicators, and before I play too much with it, let me go ahead and create a copy of that so that we can kind of manipulate some data. And what I'm going to do over here is let me just create a new sheet, and I'll call this as multi-sheet. Now imagine that you get Excel file which has, now if you look at all these Excel files, all these tabs, it's actually nicely formatted. You know that the first row is the number of columns, then is your data, and so on and so forth, right? But what if you don't get it in that format, right? Many times in Excel you'll get multiple tables in a sheet with some commentary and stuff, and then it's not that easy to just connect to that and then pull in the data. So let me just go ahead and show you a few things. So let's imagine that you have a table, something like this, right? And looks like this. Let me go ahead and format this a little bit. Okay, let's do some bold, something like this, right? So this is how you get it, and let me just make sure that the first row has some data in it. All right, so this is one table you get, and let's assume that there is one more table. Let's say this one, right? Data, whatever, data by world, and I'll go ahead and just paste that here. So now you have two tables. So naturally it's not a simple just connect and use it kind of a framework. So I'll go ahead and just make this look a little bit more prettier, and then we can play around with this. All right, that's good. And then let me just format this a little bit more. All right, so you see that we have now two tables, just one below the other, and visually when we see, we know that this is table 1 with 3 columns, this is table 2, and so on and so forth. But how does Tableau recognize that, right? So if it's something very simple, Tableau has some tools which will help you do that. So let me go ahead and just connect to my Excel sheet. All right, so we have these two tables in Excel, and let me just go ahead and quickly connect to Tableau. So I'll go to my data source and then make a new data connection and then connect to my Excel file. Before I do that, I need to make sure I have saved this file. And all right, and then I'll go ahead and just quickly connect to the new data source, and that's Excel and my copy. All right, so once I connect to this, it is actually showing me a couple of things, right? So it's showing me all the tabs, and you see this new tab appearing over here called multi-sheet. But if I just drag and drop multi-sheet over here, it is basically going to give me some weird data, because what it's doing is it's actually detecting a couple of other columns in this. All right, so just one more thing, that I just paused the video and just added a new column and called it US-int, and I'll get back to this soon on why I added a separate column. I wanted to show you something else. All right, so it's basically treating this as one big table, and this is where the trick comes, right? So now if you use a data interpreter, it runs some algorithms where basically it'll kind of detect that there are two tables in the Excel file, and it'll actually split it. So if you see, it has actually created multi-sheet A1 to C20, and that's basically your top table. That is this table, right? And then the next one that it created is this particular table. So if I drag and drop A26 onwards, it'll actually show you this table. So you see that for smaller things, it's kind of fine. Like it actually detected two tables and then intelligently detected the column names and stuff. So yes, so at times it's helpful. Sometimes it just goes a little bit weird. So make sure that you properly test the data, you look at the data and stuff before proceeding. Before I conclude, the one thing that I wanted to kind of talk about is this particular column I added. The reason being that, I wanted to show you something called as custom split. And what it does is, if you see this values, it's US-int, and there are two words over here separated by hyphen. So it can be separated by comma, semicolon, any other character that you want. But the idea is, if you want to split this into two different columns, there is something called as custom split, where you can just say that split by hyphen, split the first part, second part, or all the parts, right? So I'm going to say all the parts, and when I click OK, it'll just split into two columns, and I can go ahead and kind of rename that. Let me just rename it and call it as US code or something, whatever is, whatever you want. Basically, I just wanted to show you that as well. So yeah, mainly two things. We looked a little bit about the data interpreter, and then we looked at how to split this as well. So hope that this helps, at least in cleaning up some basic data. So yeah. All right, so there you go. So now you have a few more tools in your pocket to clean up the data. Again, use this with discretion and always check if the data interpreter results are as per your expectations. So again, we looked at a couple of things over here, and I think you should be very comfortable right now to import data, play around with it, manipulate it, blend it, join the data, building some basic reports out there, trying out visualizations and stuff. So I think we have laid out the foundations pretty strong now. So what we'll do is we'll look at some more advanced concepts like building calculations and a few charts and stuff like that. So I think once you are acquainted with that, you'll have enough tools in your pocket to go ahead and do some very complex analysis, or even apply for a job as a reporting analyst or something like that, so that you at least know that given a set of data, wherever it resides, you know what to do, how to aggregate that, how to build some story around that, and how to build some beautiful graphs. So hope that's helping you so far. If not, leave me a comment or connect with me via my website, and we'll see what we can do. Thank you. Hey folks, welcome back. So we have covered a lot of basics so far and built a good foundation. So let's go ahead and look at some visualization concepts. So let me show you a few ways to create some advanced visualization. So the goal of this lecture is to kind of give you a walkthrough of some advanced visualization techniques, some ways to sort data, some ways to group data, and what are the other features available. All right, so let me open up Tableau, and this is the same workbook that we have been working with in the last few lectures. And what I'm going to do is, let's start something from scratch, right? Let me add a new data source, and then I'll connect it to my SQL server. All right, so I'll go ahead and connect to my AdventureWorks database. Now, again, just a quick rewind. This is a database that ships along with SQL Server. This is like a sample database that Microsoft provides. I have actually given some links in case you are interested in kind of installing that, but this is not an absolute necessity for this course or anything. All right, so let me actually drag and drop a few tables. So let's say, all right, let's say the purchase order detail. Okay, and it shows a couple of rows and a couple of columns. Looks like everything would be measures, so we'll need something to have some dimensions as well. So let's see if there is some other table. All right, so let's use product and see what it gives us. Did an inner join, let's update it. All right, so we have some data to play with, and let's also take the purchase order detail, right? So 3 things that we have joined, and now we have some data to work with. Actually, let me do it this way. Purchase order header, maybe, and then product. Maybe if I join it the other way, I'll get some data. Okay, so I have some data to play with now, right? So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and create a worksheet and it has automatically classified as dimensions and measures. Now, what we are going to be looking at is this particular tab, show me, right? It has a number of graphs, and you see that everything is disabled here, but when you hover on it, it kind of shows you like what is required to enable it. Like in this case, it's 1 or more dimensions and 0 or 2 measures, right? So let's go ahead and select one measure and one dimension and see what happens, right? So let's take, say, name, and let's take order quantity. So I've just selected using the control. So I've pressed the control button and I've clicked on one dimension and one measure, and you see that some of the things get enabled over here, right? So let's say that I'm clicking on the horizontal chart, and it kind of gives me this horizontal chart based on the two things that we selected, right? The name and the order quantity. Cool. Yeah, one cool thing is if you hover on this particular column, you see this small icon, and if you click on that, that'll actually sort this, and if you click it again, it'll sort it in ascending, and so on and so forth. So you can kind of cycle that. The other way is definitely you can go to the particular attribute and then say sort, and then it'll give you a couple of options as to how to sort it. You can sort it ascending, descending by alphabetically, or you can sort it based on a particular field as well. So some options out there that you can kind of look at. And then again, if you want to kind of clear off this whole chart, there is a easy way to do that, and that is a ready-made icon called Clearsheet, and then it just clears the whole sheet, right? So let's try some other graph. Let's try say product line, and what else? Let's do list price. So again, I'm selecting 2, and let's say I select on pie chart, and it creates a pie chart for me, right? So it's kind of very simple, but this pie chart is a little bit it's difficult to read. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to kind of display the numbers. So drag and drop list price to label, and it will actually show you the numbers. And again, you can, if you want just percentages, you can just right click. This is something we covered in the previous lecture. Say quick calculation and say % of total, and then it kind of gives you this % of total. Again, you can click on this and say format, and then say I just want 1 decimal point, and it'll show you 1 decimal point. So plenty of stuff you can do with this, with formatting and stuff like that, right? Let's look at one more example, but you get the overall picture, right? It's basically just choosing a couple of dimensions and measures and seeing which graph fits in best into that criteria. So let's do something else. Let's take the product line, and then let's say line total and order quantity, right? And if you do this, it kind of gives you a couple of options which absolutely requires 2 measures, right? So if I click on this scatter plot, you'll find this getting plotted, right? This is the line total, this is the order, and their intersection is kind of what is marked over here. So some cool stuff, and then you can visualize the data as a tabular format as well. So this is the product line, this is the line total, and I've just converted that into a scatter plot, right? So it's pretty cool to kind of look at these different things that is provided by Tableau. Now, yeah, so one more thing I wanted to kind of show you is, let's actually do something. Let's actually clear the sheet, and then let's use name and say order quantity, right? And I'm going to plot this and sort this out, right? There are a couple of things available over here. Let me just close this. One is if you kind of right click, it kind of selects one of them, and you can actually select everything and say right click and say mark label and always show. So it'll kind of show you those labels as well, right? Similarly, there are a couple of things you can do, like if you want to kind of maybe just concentrate on the top 10, you can kind of select the top 10, right? And then hover on it and say keep only, and it's going to filter it out, right? So we'll talk more about filters, but you see that the attribute has appeared in filters, but we'll talk more about that. Yeah, by the way, if you actually click on this left side arrow, it'll undo, and it has like a lot of undo steps. Like you can keep undoing it like 100 times or more. So if you make a mistake, just keep clicking on that, right? The next cool thing I wanted to kind of show you is, suppose you are looking at this chart and you want to kind of group the top performing into one set, you can actually highlight on that, hover on that, and then actually create a separate set out of it. Let me go ahead and create this, and then I'll call this as group 1 or something like this, right? And now if you actually search for group, there is a set called group 1. So I'll just go ahead and clear this. Oops, I'll clear this and say group 1, and it'll tell you inside and outside of that group, and I can actually start playing around with some parameters, right? So list price of all the things that was inside that group that we selected versus outside. So it kind of gives you an inside cluster, outside cluster analysis. You can also deep dive and say, give me the names of or the product lines inside it, and then the product lines outside it. So plenty of stuff you can do with it. Right, so a lot of stuff in that. Of course, you can actually, this is one way of grouping it, but you can actually have another, custom calculations as well. We covered calculations a little bit. So let me show you this. So say for instance, you have style and then you have a list price, right? So let's say I want to create two groups, anything that's less than maybe 1000 as group 1 and anything that's greater than 1000 as group 2. And there's an easy way of doing it, right? So you can just right click and say create a calculated field, and I will just call this as groupings, and I'll say that if my sum of list price is say less than 1000, then I'm calling it as group A, else I will call that as group B. Simple stuff, right? And then end. The calculation contains errors. Let's see what the error is. I forgot to close this. Now it should be fine. So once we drag and drop groupings, this is one way to kind of add some groups. So it has group A, group B according to our calculation, right? All right, so one of the things I wanted to also show you is concept of parameters, right? So I will go ahead and create a new parameter. I will call this as my custom threshold. And let's see, custom threshold, and I'm going to expose this parameter and then, use this for something. So what should we use it for? Let's say, for example, we just created these groupings and I don't want to hard code this 1000. Rather, I want the user to send the threshold. So I'm going to say that take this from my custom threshold and then accordingly classify it, right? So it is all group B. Now let's say if I put 1000, you see it changing, right? So this parameter is actually driving that filter and that particular grouping, right? So plenty of stuff you can see. I just wanted to show you how you can connect these different things and then create this highly flexible reports. Yeah, so again, I'll provide some reading materials as well. Hopefully this will give you, this lecture should have given you a brief introduction on how to create charts and reports and how to group stuff, how to use some calculations, and how to use parameters more effectively to have more dynamic interaction with the users, and then they can interact with the report more effectively, right? So yeah, hope to see you in the next lesson. So have a great day. Welcome back, folks. So we are almost nearing the end of this series. We learned a lot of basics, but one thing we haven't talked about much is how do we filter out data from our reports? So the primary goal of this lecture is to show you some advanced filtering techniques. So we're going to cover some concepts which will help you design some basic reports, but at the same time use some of the features that are available in Tableau, right? So there are many ways in which you can enabling some quick filtering. You can do some cascading filters. So one filter is dependent on another. You can actually control filters using parameters. You can kind of show some customized messages in the graph, some dynamic messages in the graph, and then you can sort of put some reference lines and those stuff. So don't worry about it. We'll look at a few examples that will possibly make these things more clear. All right, so let me go ahead and just open up Tableau. And what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to create a new data source, and we'll just connect to our SQL server, which we have been using so far, right? So I'm going to connect to the same data source, and I'm going to select AdventureWorks. And again, just a rewind for people who might not recollect what is AdventureWorks. It's a sample database that is shipped by Microsoft. So I have just installed that database, in my SQL Server instance. Now, if you are interested, in doing that as well, there is a separate course that I have in which I show you how to install these things. I'll also put a link in the description or in the notes so that you can follow along with me. All right, so let's go ahead and just pull some tables. We'll use the same tables that we used in our previous lecture. So we use the purchase order detail, not this one. So purchase order detail, I believe this one. And I think we use the product detail, right? Or just the product. So let's go ahead and use product, and they will inner join. And then I think we use the product header as well. Let's see. Where is it? Oh, it's actually purchase header. Yeah, I think we use this one. All right, so we have some data to work with, and we are going to use this, to kind of show you a few things. All right, so we have a blank worksheet right now, right? So let me go ahead and just create a basic report. So what I'll do is I will drop a couple of dimensions, and let's see, let's drop color. Let's drop one more, let's drop name. And what else? Maybe the order quantity, right? So we'll have a few measures. Actually, let me also drop a list price also, so that we have two measures and two dimensions, right? So we, in our previous lectures, we saw how to sort this and stuff like that. So I'm not going to go over that. All right. So now what we are going to do is we are going to drag and drop this class into these filters, right? And it gives me a pop-up as to, what all classes should be selected. Now, the thing is that if you see, this is actually during your report design time, meaning users won't get this choice to choose. So you are actually designing this report, and in the report you say that, okay, show me just the data which belongs to class L, and it'll actually filter that down, right? So you're making the report, with that filter on. Okay. Again, now if you want people to kind of dynamically interact with the report, and when you deploy the report, if you want people to actually choose, so what you can do is you can just say show filter, and now this becomes available as a part of the report, and then people can choose whatever they want, and this report will dynamically reflect that. So that is one way of actually filtering. Definitely, if you go here in the small downward arrow, there's a couple of options over here in which you can kind of design the overall filter panel as well. So say for instance, I want a drop down. I can use this as a drop down. I can say I want a drop down but multiple values, so I can do this. But every time when I check or uncheck this gets refreshed. Now if this has a lot of values, the report loading becomes a little slow. For that, I generally like to use this one, customize and show apply button. So what it does is you can just select a few things and then click apply, and then it will apply in one shot, right? So some pretty interesting stuff. All right, so let me just choose a couple more. Okay. The next one I wanted to kind of show you is, now this is actually, users can also do it, but you can use this as a shortcut when you're designing your reports. So one of the things is, if you say, click on this particular attribute or dimension, color black, and just keep your mouse there or hover over that, you see a couple of options here. And one of them says keep only, and one of them says exclude, right? So if I say keep only, it will actually just keep those rows, and it has automatically created a filter with that selection, right? So this is a nice way to also do this. So even when you deploy the report, a user could also do this, or you can just say exclude nulls, and it'll just exclude nulls and then give you everything else. So that is kind of very cool. So let me all right, so let's do this. Actually, let me show you how to conditionally filter something. So Okay, I have a clear sheet now. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you how to add a condition, filter condition, while you're creating the report. So I have just used color over here, and then let me drag and drop a measure. I'll use the order quantity and maybe the received quantity. But what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to use this filter color, and it's going to show me all the possible values. Now I'm going to use every value, but I'm going to say that show me just the colors whose order quantity is maybe, you know, greater than or equal to whatever, say 10,000, right? So once I do this, you see that, you know, that particular condition is applied on the color filter. So that's pretty cool, right? So you can use some conditions as well. The other thing I wanted to kind of show you is, using cascading filters, right? So we have color right now, and let me actually even add a class, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to expose the class and color as filters, right? So what we need to do is we need to make sure that whatever values we choose here, and that should basically be passed on to this color filter, meaning only the applicable values that particular class has should be shown here. So let me go ahead and show that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that the color filter, I'm going to say show only relevant values, right? So what it will do is basically it will basically depend on the previous filter, and only whatever are relevant and applicable values would be shown in the color, right? So imagine it this way, right? So if you have a geography filter, you have super region, regions, states, countries, so on and so forth, right? So you can kind of create a waterfall model where you first choose a country, and then only the relevant states within that country will be shown. Then you choose a state, then only the relevant cities within the state would be shown. You choose a city, relevant streets would be shown, and so on and so forth. So it's kind of a cascading effect, and hence we call it as cascading filters. So if you choose H, only the relevant values belonging to H will be shown. So it's a nice user experience because the user doesn't have to know which filter should be chosen. He only gets all relevant filters. All right, so this was pretty cool. I wanted to also show you this new tab over here called Analytics. We haven't really seen much of stuff in that, so let me go ahead and show that. All right, so actually let me clear this, and I'll just make something new. So I'll use the order quantity, and let me just use some date, right? So I'll use the cell start date. And by the way, I don't think I showed you this. You can actually use the exact date and basically say I will it as discrete. So it'll actually, give you the entire date. By default, it will roll up to years, but you can kind of modify it that way as well, right? So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to plot this as a graph. So it will give me a graph, something like this. Right, let me just quickly close this so that we have some room to work with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the Analytics tab, and I'm going to say I need a reference line. All right, so let's go ahead and add a reference line. And you have three options. One is table, pane, and cell. Let's just start with something simple. So I'll click on this reference line and then say, oops, edit. And I can go ahead and actually change this reference line, right? So I'm going to use this as, say, a constant. And I want the reference line to appear on 500,000, right? So it appears in 500,000, and then I know you can kind of even label it, right? Threshold reference line, something like this, right? So generally this is used to, I personally use it to show targets. So if you're plotting something like sales, and then you can have line which actually shows you what is the target and how much of the data points are above target and below targets, and you get the idea, right? Yeah, another cool thing is we even saw things about the marks over here. There's a plenty of stuff you can do. One of the things we really saw was definitely using the the label. So you can go ahead and just drag and drop the order quantity and it'll actually show you the labels for it, right? If you also see, there is this, when I hover on this, it actually gives a couple of information. Now this is fully customizable, right? You can actually do two things, right? So you can right click on this and then you can say annotate, and then I'll say mark, and I can actually write something over here, right? So I will do something like the order quantity, if I can spell it right, for the year is something like this, right? So when I click OK, it'll actually show you this as an annotation. But at the same time, you could also write a tooltip, right? But what we need to do over here is basically we need to customize this tooltip, right? So I'm going to actually write something, the order quantity for the year, this is, all right. So this was basically a dynamic text that we are generating. So once I click OK, and if you hover on this, you see that, that particular sentence is generated. Now, I personally find this really helpful because when you're actually creating a report that is going to non-tech people and, pure business analysts or, business dev folks, the more descriptive you can get and the better story you can say in terms of sentences and stuff, the faster they're going to understand. So I generally use annotations, tooltips to dynamically tell them, how to read the data. One of the things that I recently did, which I remember, is actually doing a year-over-year comparison. So if you hover on a point, it will actually show you this point is for this year and we are comparing it with year -2, something like that, right? So it's more descriptive and you can add additional information in it. So you could say that as of today in 2017, the sales are this, but if you compare it with 2015, the sales was, Y, and the difference between that is 2017 minus 2004. So you can do all those calculations and actually write a simple story in the tooltip itself so that it's more descriptive. Before we go again, I think this is quite intuitive. You can actually edit the axis and do a bunch of stuff in it. You can change the title. You can change these, the units the incremental units that you have. You can keep it uniform, you can keep it independent, or you can keep it fixed, and so on and so forth. That's kind of very intuitive. So I'm not going to go too much into it, but I just wanted to show you that facility exists as well. So hope you got some basic idea regarding charts, annotations, tooltips, how to use reference lines, and how to use some filtering. Now this is something that you will be using in your day-to-day life when you're actually using Tableau. All these things was pretty much a part of every report. So I hope that was useful. Thanks for watching. Hey folks, welcome back again. So in the last few lectures, we saw a lot of concepts, right from connecting to different data sources, joining them on need, cleaning up data, and ultimately creating tabular and graphical reports. We saw a little bit on filtering and calculations as well. I would like to show you more on that in a little bit or in the coming lectures. So let's take a detour here and talk a little bit about maps. When you think about maps, the pictures that may come to your mind could be a world map or a map of the United States or a map of any other country, right? So what we're going to see is, can we plot some data in a map, right? For example, can we show the population numbers by states in a map, right? So the goal is to explore Tableau visualization using Tableau maps. So what would we exactly look at in this particular lecture? Right, so we'll look at things like latitudes, longitudes, geospatial data, plotting a few things, how to play around with maps, and so on and so forth. So essentially, how is this information about maps stored? We talk about maps a lot, but there should be some way of storing this information, right? So we can actually store using something called latitudes and longitudes. And if you're not familiar with latitudes and longitudes, I have provided a link in the description. Or we can actually use a combination of country, state, city, postal code, etc. to kind of pinpoint the exact location of the part of world that we are talking about. Now, just as an optional FYI, I would say, is SQL Server has a data type called geospatial or geography data type. Now, this is a very interesting concept, and I have covered that in depth in my advanced databases course as well. But I have also provided a link of what is exactly geospatial data in the description. All right, so we know that what we are going to do over here, we know how map information might be stored. Let's look at some sample data and let's try to plot a few things in Tableau, right? So what I have done is I have taken some few rows from our AdventureWorks database and I have just put this into a table, right? And this is nothing but country, state, and city. But I have just punched in some random values and called it as profit, right? So we will keep this very, very simple. And this is how it's going to kind of look like. So what we'll do is, we will take this data and import it into Tableau and see what we can do with it. So I'll fire up Tableau and I'll say that I want to connect to my Excel book. And I call this as latitude, longitude. And here is some sample data, right? And just keep in mind that this doesn't have latitudes and longitudes, right? But let's see what happens when we create some reports out of this. So I'm going to create a new sheet. And on the left-hand pane, when you see dimensions, you see that the data type of this has been auto-recognized as geography. And if it doesn't, all you have to do is right-click and then just change the geographic role to one of these, right? So that's how it is. And then one of the other cool things which you must have seen by now is this latitudes and longitudes, right? If you remember in our data, we never had these columns. So Tableau basically maintains an internal table which can look at combination of country, state, city, and some other things, and kind of intelligently recognize what is the latitude and what is the longitude of the point that we are talking about, right? So let's look at how those things work. When I actually double click on country, it'll open up a map, and it has kind of plotted these points. And if I just hold the shift button, I can move this map, right? And I can actually zoom in, zoom out, or use my mouse scroll bar and zoom in and zoom out. This is pretty cool. So I'm just using my scroll wheel, if I may call it that way, of my mouse, and then looking at each of these countries and looking at a few features of that. So this is some basic data out here, but now what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click on state, and now it has added an extra data point here. Within a country, it is also highlighting the states now, right? Similarly, I can do that for city as well, right? So it is highlighting the cities. So here what we have done is we have just taken some country, state, and city information and then plotted that on a map. So Tableau was smart enough to recognize when I'm talking about country, USA, state, Washington, and city, say Redmond, where should I plot that particular point? So Tableau knows that stuff. It has its internal database something, but it knows where to plot that. So it's actually that simple. And then you can do the formatting as you do normally in your normal graphical and tabular reports. Like for example, you can say, maybe the city, put it in the labels, and it'll actually label the cities. So if I just zoom in and wait for some time, it'll start appearing, right? And again, the customization is exactly as we have discussed before. So we have a lot of stuff in Washington. So let me zoom in a little bit more, and you see these points which is plotted. And again, I can actually drag and drop the profit in the label, and it'll also show me the profits as well. All right, so some cool stuff here. The next thing I wanted to show you, if you go to the map menu and then just click on map layers, you get some additional options here where you can kind of say what style you want. Do you want a light style, normal style, and a bunch of other options. Like if you want to see the streets and highways, you can do that as well. Some cool stuff here that you can play around with. The next thing I wanted to show you is you see this 147 unknown, and if you click on that, it'll actually open up a small mapping table, right? So these are actually the locations that Tableau couldn't find it in its database, and hence it was not able to plot it, right? So you can actually solve it in two ways. One of the ways is actually selecting a matching location so that Tableau knows what this location could be. And the reason why you might get this unknown is maybe you have misspelled some city name or something, and hence it's not finding a one-to-one match. So you can use this mapping to kind of solve those discrepancies. Right now, one of the things is if you kind of observe, you actually provided the city, state, and country and or postal code, and Tableau just looked it up into its database and plotted it into the map, right? So when you have these things in your data, Tableau is able to auto generate your latitudes and longitudes and all the good stuff, and basically it's able to pinpoint it on the map. But now imagine a scenario where you need to plot multiple points in the same city, right? So by what I mean by that is, for example, Microsoft's headquarters is located in Redmond, right? Redmond is a city in Washington State, and Microsoft has many buildings, right? So in Redmond it has, they call it building 22, building 35, building 36, and all are located next to each other. Now if I look at their state, city, country, postal code, pretty much everything will be the same, right? So all of them are, since next to each other, they all will be belonging to the same state, Washington, same city, Redmond. Thus, if you plot that in a map, you'll just get 1 point on the map because all the 3 points are sharing the same value. So how do you get around with this problem, right? So you need to distinctly show each building, in the map. So how do you really get around with this? So Tableau has something called as custom geocoding, but I'm going to park that a little bit, and I'm going to show you something more simpler, which I have personally used in my projects. And don't worry, we'll briefly visit custom geocoding, and I'll put some links as well in the description. But let me kind of show you a few more things. So if I open up that Excel sheet which I just showed you, and then let me go ahead and just create a tab, and I'll call this as custom. And what I'm going to do is, before I actually go further, I wanted to show you this cool website. And this is called as latlong.net. And what it does is, if you just type in an address like building 33, it will actually show you the latitudes and longitudes of that. So this is sometimes pretty useful when you want to find the latitude and longitude of a particular a location. So I would suggest play around with that, and again I'll put this link in the description as well. So what I'm going to do over here is let me just go ahead and make some sample data. So we talked about the Microsoft building, so let's just run with that, right? So let me just create a column called Microsoft building number, and then I'll say latitudes, and then longitude, and then just to make sure I conform with all the database rules, I'll create an ID, and I'll just create 4 rows in this. Just give it some random ID, and I'm going to call this as building 22. Let's call this building 22, building whatever 35, and by the way, these are all actual buildings. They do number it this way. So building 36 or 37, right? So I have this information, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill in the latitudes and longitudes of this, right? So I'm going to use my website, which I just showed you. So if I type in building 22, it will give me the latitudes and longitudes. So I'll just kind of use that information. Now let me just briefly pause this video so that you don't have to watch me search these values and type it in. All right, so I have typed in a couple of values, and if you see, I have typed in these building numbers and the corresponding latitudes and longitudes. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just import that sheet into our Tableau workbook. So I'll create a new data source, and just to keep it a little simple. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to refresh this, and I'm going to actually use this one, the custom, right? So it has this information, and I'll create a new sheet. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to double click on the latitudes and longitudes, and it's kind of going to plot this, right? And right now it is showing me one particular point over here, and let me go ahead and add a couple of more things. So if I keep zooming in, it'll show me those 4 points that I just added. And let me just go ahead and switch on streets and highways as well, so that you can kind of see a better picture of what I'm talking about. And just so that we are able to recognize what each points are, I'm going to label this. So this is building 35, 36, 37, all are just nearby, just as I said, right? So some pretty cool stuff. So this is a way in which, if you see, all these 4 points have the same city, state, and country and postal code and all. So naturally, if you use the typical way of letting Tableau auto generate the latitudes and longitudes, all the 4 points will basically be the same point, right? So that's where we introduced our custom latitudes and longitudes. All right, so yeah, one more thing which I promise I'll mention is custom geocoding, right? Custom geocoding is a way to extend the existing functionality of Tableau maps to include some custom locations. It's just like the one that we discussed, and I'm going to show you a link over here. And so this is basically the Tableau helpline, help documentation, and I'll put this link in the description as well. What it does is, Tableau allows you to kind of create a CSV file, and when you create the CSV file, you need to take care of certain things. First of all, you need to make sure that the format, the column names, the column casing, everything matches. Even if there is a spelling error, Tableau will not recognize it. So there are basically formats and ways in which you can prepare this CSV file to kind of add an existing functionality, extend an existing functionality, or add a new functionality altogether, right? So they call it as adding new roles. Like, for example, creator name would not be in their database, but they will have state, country in their database. So you can kind of add an additional attribute so that these creator names could be mapped. Now it's a different way of what I showed you, but you can kind of create this CSV file, and then once you have the CSV file, what you could do is you could go and kind of import that CSV file by saying import custom geocoding, and it'll kind of plot that points that you added in the CSV file. Now, just an FYI, I do not personally use this a lot. I rather prefer that I have the latitudes and longitudes stored somewhere, like a database or somewhere, and I just plot the points like the ones that I just showed you for Microsoft buildings, right? So that's great. So now you know how to handle maps. Now there are a few other advanced concepts like Polygon Mapping and so on and so forth, which I suggest you if you're interested, you should definitely read that. I personally don't use them that much, but it's kind of good to know what exists out there. So I hope that you have a good understanding of how the basic maps work, how you can plot some points, how you can kind of gather this information around. Now we'll meet in the next lecture with some more advanced concepts and topics. So see you next time. Hey folks, welcome back. In this lecture, we will discuss some advanced analytics techniques and graphs. So when you do some analysis on the data, it's often a good idea to look at things from a 50,000 feet overview and then dig more deeper, right? So this is where some of the advanced Tableau visualization and charting techniques come into play. So the main goal of this lecture and a series of the further lectures would be to look at least some of the charting techniques that Tableau offers, and that may be helpful for your analysis. So for instance, say you're analyzing all sales in the United States by state, right? And you estimate that that you made about $100 million in sales in 2017. So your boss appreciates your analysis and asks you, what are the top states that contributed to $100 million sales? A best way to answer this question is actually using the 80-20 rule, meaning most of the time 20% of the clients will contribute to about 80% of your sales. And a better way of representing this is actually something called as Pareto Charts, and it was named after a person called V. Pareto. So I have actually added a Wikipedia link for this one. So let's open that. All right, so this is the some information on Pareto charts, but we will go through it. The first thing is it was kind of named after a person called V. Pareto, and this is how a typical Pareto chart looks like, right? It has a bar graph and then it has a line, and we'll walk through this in a second. But if you look at the typical definition, what it says is the left vertical axis is the frequency of occurrence, but it can alternatively represent the cost or another important unit of measure, and the right vertical axis is the cumulative percentage of the total number of occurrences, right? And let's actually look at an example over here. So let's say this graph, right? So I just clicked on that. So what you see is this is just like a simple bar graph, right? So what it has is the total late arrivals and the number of times that has occurred by these reasons, right? So if there are 1,000 arrivals, late arrivals, maybe 300 of them were due to traffic, 200 were due to childcare, and so on and so forth, right? So basically, if you say that, okay, of the total 1,000 cases, how much is contributed by traffic, how much is contributed to traffic and childcare, that sort of answers is what this graph provides. So if you look at this particular line chart, what it says is traffic, the reason equal to traffic, right? That is that basically accounts to about 32% of the total, right? Of the total late arrivals, 32% is due to traffic, right? The next point, if you see, is childcare, and the corresponding point that you see is about 60%. Now what this says is traffic and childcare, so it's kind of a running total. Okay, so traffic and childcare contribute to 60% of late arrivals. So that's how you should read this graph, right? So traffic and childcare and public transportation contributes to about 78% of the total late arrivals. So now this graph is very simple to read, right? You can actually say that, okay, what are the top 80% is this much. This is your cutoff point, right? This is your cutoff point where it kind of shows the 80% is due to these three reasons. So if somebody asks you that, what is the problem we need to solve, you'd say that these are the three problems which are majorly contributing to 80% of the late arrivals, right? Now this graph is actually very simple because you just had like 6 points here on the x-axis, right? 6 reasons. Now imagine that you have 2,000 reasons, right? So looking at this graph, you can actually say that out of those 2,000 reasons, you need to concentrate on only 4 reasons because they contribute 80% of the late arrivals, right? So that is how it helps you to kind of formulate your analysis and actually tell a better story on this one. All right, so I hope we are clear on the overall definition of what a Pareto chart is and how to go about actually reading that. So let's go ahead and plot some data in Tableau and kind of see how that works out. So let me actually go ahead and just create some dummy data. And what I'm going to do is maybe I'll just use the same example that is given in Wikipedia, right? So let's just create 2 columns. Maybe I'll call the first column as late arrivals or late arrival cause. and the second as number of cases reported. And I'll just put down those 5 reasons here, right? So the one is whatever, public transportation. Let's just give some random number like 150 occurrences, and I'll just pause the video and just make some changes to this. All right, so I have put in some sample data over here, and looking at this, you'll know that the total is whatever, let's see, the total is around 950. So 150 divided by 950 will give you the percentage, 10 divided by, so you can kind of get the contribution by each of these causes. And essentially we are going to plot this into a Pareto chart and see how we can best make use of Tableau to represent that information. So I'll go ahead and save this, and I'll call this as Pareto new, something like this. All right, so we have some data to play with. What I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up Tableau, and I'm going to create a new data source, and I'll go ahead and connect to the file that we just created. Call this as Pareto new, and once that is imported, we can actually see the 5 rows that we just put into the file, right? So I'll go ahead and create a new sheet, and the simple way to start a report is just create a simple tabular report, right? So this is how you would kind of represent this whole information in a simple tabular report. Now what we want to do is we want to actually go ahead and create a Pareto chart, right? So the first thing what you can do is make this into a bar chart, right? And then you can plot it into the x-axis, all the reasons, and the y-axis shows the number of cases reported. And I can go ahead and just sort this so that you get this sorted list from the top to the bottom, right? And next what I'm going to do is I'm going to just fit this as an entire view so that it fills up the screen. And there is a particular way to actually create a Pareto chart. And first thing what you do is you have to duplicate this, right? So the way you do the duplication of rows is hold the control key, click on sum number of records, and then number of cases reported, and then just drag and drop one more. So you see that there are 2 graphs, one below the other, right? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to transform the bottom graph into a line chart, and this kind of gives me a line. All right, so there are a couple of calculated fields that I need to adjust. Sorry, a quick table calculations that I need to adjust so that I get a good look and feel of a Pareto chart. All right, so how do I go about doing that? So the first thing what I need to do is I need to go here and say quick table calculation and say running total. So it'll kind of give me a running total of this, right? So the first one is 500, and then 500 plus 200 is 700, and this keeps increasing, right? So this is like the first step. The second step what I want to do is basically have a table calculation. I need to edit the table calculation, and I need to do 2 things here, right? One is I need to make sure that later I will cause is the dimension I'm referring to, and the second is I need to add a secondary calculation where what I want is basically a % of total, right? So this will give me a % of total because we want to represent it as a percentage, like a running percentage, right? So once that is done, you're pretty much ready. Then what I do is just right click and say dual axis, and then it plots one above the other, right? Now you see that this is more of a a different format of representation. I can just simply go here and say just show me the bar charts, and it'll show me the typical bar charts, right? So this is what we saw in that in that Wikipedia link. So this is the Wikipedia page, but again there are a couple of things we can do to format this even better. So first and foremost is definitely hold your control button, and then maybe you can just use labels, so it'll actually show you all the percentages. And again, you can go ahead and format this to just show maybe 1 decimal point and so on and so forth. So you can do all those routine stuff that we have discussed. Definitely, if you want to show the numbers against these bar charts, you can just press the control button and then, oh, just before we do that, just undo that. We need to make sure you're referencing the correct set. So press the control button, drag and drop into the label, and then you get all the labels, right? And definitely if you want to hide it, you can hide an axis and do all the good stuff. But this is the overall gist of it, right? So how you would read this is, 50 to 52 percentage, of the total late arrivals is due to traffic, right? And about 75%, 74% is due to traffic and childcare. So this is how you would represent. Again, if you want to start putting control lines and stuff like that, if you want to put a line over say 80% over here, something like this, you can definitely do that. And the way you do that is just use the constant line. So this is something we covered in our previous lectures. So you say that I want it at 80%, and then it'll kind of show you the 80% mark, and this is the intersection point, right? So if you look at this, this is basically the two main reasons that contribute to 80% of your total late arrivals. So we'll definitely discuss one or two more such advanced graphing techniques, but I hope you got a good understanding of or a gist of how to use the Pareto charts. It's really powerful, very simplifies your overall storytelling capability, and able to kind of show what your data is telling you. So hope you like that. Stay tuned for the next lecture where we visit some more concepts. Thank you. Hey, welcome back. So in the last lecture, we saw a little bit about Pareto charts and some advanced visualization techniques. So I thought that I'll kind of show you a few more advanced charting techniques so that you're aware of what's available out there or how to create these. So one of the commonly used charts is called as a waterfall chart. And if I open the Wikipedia link, a waterfall chart is nothing but, it's kind of a running total, right? So it's a form of data visualization which will kind of give you a cumulative effect, right? So for example, if you look at this particular chart, what it says is, the product revenue grew by 420,000, and then another 210,000, and then it went down by 170, and then again by 140, and so on and so forth. So basically, if you add them up, like 420 plus 210 minus 170 minus 140, you will get this 320, right? So it's kind of shows you either product over product, month over month, year over year, how the incremental or the decremental effect looks like. So I have provided the link of this particular Wikipedia page as well. Now it will be known by different names. It's commonly known as flying bricks chart or Mario chart and so on and so forth. Basically it's kind of a way in which you can kind of see how it looks like with respect to positive and negative values over the life cycle, right? So how do you actually create this particular chart? Now in Tableau, there is no straightforward graph that lets you do this, but we can kind of make it happen by a few tips and tricks. So there is actually exactly 5 steps you need to do. One is basically create a line chart, transform into running total, and then perform a few edits into that, and then ultimately you'll get this waterfall chart. So let's go ahead and actually look at these 5 steps. So I'm going to create some dummy data in front of you, and then we'll see how this looks like. All right, I just opened an Excel, and then I just put months from January to December and just typed in some random bunch of values for the profit, right? And this is what we're going to see how it looks like in Tableau. So let me go ahead and open up Tableau. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to first connect to my Excel sheet. I'll just close this one, then connect to my Excel sheet, and then connect to my waterfall table. So this is what we just typed in, right, in our Excel, and it has kind of just connected to that. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new sheet, and I'm going to precisely plot this. So first thing is that month is not recognized as a date. So I'm going to first make that as a date, right? And I'm going to use month and profit and kind of plot a line graph, right? Now I need to get to a month level, so I'm going to drill down a little bit. Now it's more of a month over month. So once this is done, what we discussed is the second step towards this is we need to kind of make it a running total, right? So the way you can do that is actually go to the measure, go to your quick table calculation and say running total. So it will get transformed this way. Okay. The next one, what we need to do is transform that to a Gantt chart. And the way we can do that is very simple. We go to the marks and say, just show this as a Gantt bar, and then it'll transform it into a Gantt chart. The third step is basically we need to create, whatever measure we are using in the graph, we need to create opposite of that, the negative value of that. And the simplest way is to just create a calculated measure for that. Right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the profit and say, let's see, create calculated field, and I'm going to call this as negative profit. And I'll just negate this, and we're done, right? So we're ready to actually go ahead and just finalize this waterfall chart. And if I just drag and drop this negative profit to size, and then drag and drop this measure to color, it'll kind of give me the Gantt chart, waterfall chart kind of an effect, right? And again, the formatting is pretty much the same as we have discussed. You can actually take this profit and then press the control key and then drag and drop into label, and it'll kind of give you these values, right? So if you add up 10,000 plus 21,000 plus 26,000 plus 24,000, minus 24,000 and look at this, it'll actually add up to 19,010. So that is the overall, the waterfall chart creation. So again, it's not something that's out of box, but you can still kind of make it happen. So we just started plotting all the incremental values and the decremental values, and it kind of shows you a cumulative effect of pluses and minuses. So it kind of resembles like a waterfall. So hope this was useful for you. I know in Excel it's kind of a little easier, but if you need to use this in Tableau, here is a way to use it. Thank you. Hello everyone. Welcome to the final few lectures of Tableau, and I hope that you're liking these courses so far. So absolutely feel free to connect with me via my website or LinkedIn if you have any questions. So I'll be happy to answer them. And all links are given in my profile or the notes or the description that goes with this course. So let's take some time and discuss a few concepts that you will need to use almost every day in your report development. Now, these are typically called as calculations or creating calculated fields. I know that we briefly touched upon them here and there, but let me also introduce you to some more useful functions that you may use it in your day-to-day while creating reports. So think of calculated fields just like your Excel formulas, right? So you kind of punch in some formula in a cell and it computes depending upon what values exist in the Excel workbook. So they help you to manipulate a number, a string, a date, etc. It is the same concept in Tableau, but we call them as calculated fields. So you can either do it inline or you can actually create a new calculated field, and I'll show you both the ways of doing it. Now, when we talk about calculated fields, there are certain things that we need to discuss, right? One is something called as level of detail. Then there is some table calculations. Then there is some logical, date, and string functions. These are the common things that you will use in your day-to-day work. All right, so let me open up Tableau. And the first thing I wanted to discuss is the level of details, or called as LOD. Now, when you refer the documentation and other areas, I understand that this might be a little confusing, and hence I've tried to make it as simple as possible, right? So let me go ahead and first connect to the saved data sources. This data source ships along with Tableau installation, so I'm going to just open that. And first and foremost is, what is LOD, right? LOD is nothing but it is used to define the level of aggregation, right? So let me show you how that works. Now let's assume that I have region. So I have about 5 regions here, and let's say I have sales, right? So I'll do this as average, and what can you infer from this particular report? What it is doing is it is taking the averages at region level, right? Now I introduce one more column over here and I'll call that as state. Now what do you observe? You observe that the averages have changed. Now it is actually taking into consideration the state level, right? So what I'm saying is your metrics, your aggregations, the levels of the aggregations will change depending upon what columns you have in your report, right? And LOD is basically a way to control that level of aggregation. So I hope you're with me so far. All right, so now given this particular situation, if I ask you, how do I actually have this particular table but still aggregate at a region level? How do I do that, right? And that's where the concept of LOD comes into place. Now, before I actually show you, in terms of some code, let me actually just plot this, right? Now, let me just duplicate this sheet and then I'll plot this as a graph. Okay, and what I'll do is I will actually just actually let me delete this and let me just choose a few of them so that we have very less data to work with. Right now, if I actually duplicate this and then plot this as a graph, you'll see that I have minimal stuff over here, right? So let me just make sure that I show the states. So if I hover on the states, you see that in the tooltip there is region, there is state and average sales. Now if I move my mouse to another state, it shows the average sales for that state. So observe the average sales, it keeps changing, right? Now if I've given you a situation, say you have to, irrespective of whatever you hover, I want to show the average sale of east, region equal to east in the tooltip. How do I do that, right? And that's where the trick of LOD comes into play. Now let me go ahead and just show you a calculation, and let's call this as LOD. And the first form of LOD is called fixed LOD, and I'll walk through this in a brief. There are three types of LODs: fixed, include and exclude, and we're talking about a fixed LOD. All right, so I'm saying fixed region, and what does fixed really does is that it will aggregate your measures as per your mentioned column name in this particular calculation, irrespective of what you drag and drop in the report. So to make it a little bit more clear, what I'm doing is I'm saying use the fixed level of detail and aggregate everything at region level irrespective of what I have in my report, and this particular aggregate the sales, right? So this is one way, and what I can do is I can just use that in the tooltip, right? So before I go and use that, so I'll go to my table and then show you how this looks like. So if I drag and drop this, you see that it has a common value, right? Now this value is same as aggregating at regional level. So if you remove state, you see that it should be the same, right? When you introduce state, that is where the level of aggregation started to split up, but using the fixed function, we are controlling that split. So what we are saying is, irrespective of what we drag and drop here, even if we drag and drop say city over here, it doesn't matter. It will always aggregate at a region level. See, it is repeated. That is what is called as a fixed. So going back to our sheet, what we could probably do is actually go to our tooltip and say that average sales for this, and then something like this, right? Average sales for region is what we just created. Let me just go ahead and also introduce that into our tooltip, and then we should be able to use that. All right, so now when I hover on this, you see that the average sales for central is 876, the second line, and irrespective of what I move, the other values change, but the aggregation remains the same. That is the power of the fixed function. So I hope that that gives you some clarity, right? So if this is clear enough, the include and exclude clauses for the LOD would be a little bit more simpler. So the second technique, one more before I actually go further, there is one more way you can kind of check this. Go to totals and say add all subtotals, and it kind of shows you the overall subtotal. Now in this case, just change this to average. Shouldn't change much because we use the formula for it. Okay, so going to include. The second technique is called as the include clause, and what it does is it says that always aggregate on whatever columns you have on your screen on your report plus whatever you include in the include clause, right? I know this might be confusing, so bear with me here. So if you see, you have two columns here, right? So meaning if you have a particular measure that is dropped in, you basically have to aggregate on both the levels, in this case at state level, right? And whatever you use in the include clause. Now, how do you write the include clause? Same as that, right? So you say that LOD, maybe I'll just call this as include, and I'll say state. And what I'm doing over here is I'm just saying that include state average of sales. Okay. And just making sure the syntax is right. All right. So if I drag and drop, actually to make it a little bit more simpler, let me just reduce the size. So if I drag and drop this one, what it does is, see your average. Let me just change this to average. So your average is about 856. So what this says is that aggregate at whatever levels you see on your report and also include state, because we basically added state to be compulsorily included in this aggregation. Now, fortunately, state is already there in our report, right? So it doesn't have to bother. So here it's 856 over here. So what it is doing is it's doing at region and state level and also including state, which already exists in the report, which means that if I actually remove state, it will still be 856, because what it says is include whatever is on the screen, whatever is on your report, in this case region, and add also whatever you have mentioned in your calculation. In this case, it is state. So if you remove or add state, it doesn't matter. It will always consider state, right? So that is the fundamental difference. And the next one is called exclude. Exclude is the other way around. So what it says is whatever columns you have in your report minus whatever you have mentioned in your calculation, right? So for example, let's say that you have state over here, right? And then you have city. And let's just make it a little bit more simpler, so that you have less data to look at. All right. So I'm going to create a new calculation over here, and we'll call this as LOD exclude. And we'll do it by whatever, right? City. And the syntax is pretty much similar. So you say exclude city average of sales. So what this says is that irrespective of whatever is on the screen, include everything, but always exclude city in your level of aggregations. So if I actually drag and drop city into this picture, exclude city, and make sure that it is average. This is the exclude. Let me just make sure. So basically it is excluding whatever is at the city level, and it is including everything else, right? So if I actually remove city, it will still be 710, because even if you included city in the picture, it didn't matter. It automatically excluded because you mentioned that in the query, right? So that is the fundamental difference in this. And LOD are very, very powerful functions that you can use, or calculations you can use. Depending upon what kind of graphs you want, what level of aggregations you want, these are really, really useful. Okay, since we are talking about calculations, let me actually show you a couple of more things, right? So one of the things is, running totals. So you have regions and then you have sales, right? Now, if you want to know that, how much does each row, how much do they contribute in terms of percentages, there is basically something called as quick table calculations, where you just go to quick table and say % of total, and it shows you, the overall percentage contribution. You can definitely just use the values also to see side by side, but if you add all this up, it will account to 100, right? So that is kind of one way of doing it. The second one is definitely if you let's actually do this. Let's do sales and let's do region. Actually, let's do something different here. Let's do the ship date and let's remove region, right? And let me plot this in a graph. Now this is basically just showing you year over year revenue, but if you want to kind of make this as a running total, you can definitely just go here and make this as a running total and it'll show you a climbing graph, right? So again, depends on your requirement. You can go ahead and modify the tooltips and all those formatting techniques that we discussed. Then the next thing is you can definitely write your own aggregations, depending upon what you need. Like for example, let's go ahead and check out a few things, right? So let's say you have region and then you have sales, right? And you can write your own calculations here, and you can just say something like custom calc and say if region equal to say central, then average of sales, else median of sales, something like this, end. Now one thing you'll observe is definitely this is not working out for a simple reason as this one, but still it shouldn't work out. So the reason being, you have an aggregate and a non-aggregate comparison, and to kind of get around with this problem, and this is a problem you'll always face when you're writing calculations, is using the ATTR or attribute keyword. And so once you add this, you should be fine. And now you can actually drag and drop your custom calculation, into this. So it'll go ahead and compute that, right? So a couple of such things. Let me actually cover one more thing. Let me cover the length function. Say length of alphabets, call something like this, and I'll say length of say region. Let's just keep it simple, and it'll basically just count the number of characters. Length of region. It is a measure, so I'll make this as a dimension and then drag and drop, and you see the length of characters over here. So some simple straightforward stuff, lot of things you can do. If the best way to learn this is when you say create a calculated field, it has all those calculations that Tableau offers, along with a simple explanation and an example. So I personally do it this way. So but I'm just discussing all the common things that you would need when you are actually creating the reports. Definitely there'll be some advanced stuff over here as well. So let's actually take one more before we conclude this. So let me create a new sheet and let's see if we have something interesting. Okay, so we have customer name, and we talked about custom splitting depending upon some parameters in our previous lectures, and that was done at a data source layer, right? And here you can do it at a report layer also. So if you right click on customer name and say that create a transform and say custom split, it says how should you split it. And if you see, the names are separated by spaces. So if we just say space and then split the, maybe the first 2 columns or something like that, or just split everything, it'll actually create 3 columns. I didn't split it properly. Let me try that one more time. Transform, custom split, space, all. Okay, so now it has split it. So this was the first one. You see that Aaron is the first split, this is the second split, and this is the third split. So naturally, if your names are actually separated by semicolons or anything like that, all you need to do is just manipulate that that splitting entity, and then you should be fine with that. So couple of things you can do, and remember, all these calculations are done at the Tableau layer, right? It's at the report layer, it will not be reflected in your data or anything like that behind the scenes. It is all computed at runtime when somebody loads the report. So those are the few things I wanted to share with you. I'll try to record one more lecture with some more tips and tricks, and then what are some advanced courses and what are some advanced things you can do in this field in order to kind of grow in the data science and analytics as well. So hopefully you like the course. Please feel free to connect with me or join via my website, and then we can I can try to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much.